10mm hand loads, 200 grain XTP. So these bullets were sent over to the channel by one of my Patreon supporters, Hillbilly Scholar. So thank you for sending those bullets over to the channel. He also sent over a reloading die set for making these rounds. So I did load up some 180 grains already in the XTP. Now it's time to try our 200 grain XTP. So what I got going on there is a 200 grain XTP 10mm. We have our large pistol primers, or Winchester large pistol primers, our accurate number 9 powder, 12.5 grains, that's the max by the book, and 1.250 overall length of those cartridges. So I'm going to use my 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 610 revolver, and that's going to be my main gun for this test. But I do also want to see if we have any velocity loss due to cylinder gap, and maybe the rifling of a semi-auto might make it perform a little bit different in gel as well. So I'm going to use my Glock 41 conversion. This is a 45 auto. It's converted over to 10mm. It doesn't run very well, but it'll give me a good idea if we get any like gas loss from cylinder gap. Because if you actually look at the you know, where the cartridges start here in these two guns, very similar overall length. You get just a hair more with that revolver, but it's close enough. I think this will really tell me a lot about cylinder gap gas loss. So we're going to go through the chronograph with both of those guns. Then we're going to do our 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way that can potentially clog a hollow point, no rib simulation that can slow down that penetration, and we'll see what we get for our best potential with those rounds. Then I'll move on to doing more of a real world simulation where I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So when you're talking 3 inches and 16 inches in this gel, it's more like 1.5 inches and about 8 inches in a real living target. So with ribs on the front and back, what we're looking to do is try to stay within this first gel block here with that rib simulation in, but it's acceptable if we go up to maybe 2.5 inches past that back rib simulation. That would indicate it probably would not pass through an average size attacker. So we'll do our plain clear ballistic shot, then our real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up, I'm going to run that round in our Glock conversion here. This thing probably will malfunction quite a bit because I never got it right. But this load is rated at 1170 feet per second with that powder charge through a 5-inch barrel. Use my 5.3-inch Glock 41 here with a 10mm conversion barrel. So let's see how close we get to that 1170 feet per second that particular load is rated at. $11.66, pretty close. And I've seen all the type of malfunctions that I always see with this type of thing, this type of conversion here. 1163, 1168, 1154. Let me try to get one more here. 1159. So being that I am, you know, a good 5 yards from the target, that's not bad. That's really close to rated velocity, because rated velocity they do it right from the muzzle. I'm not going to get that close because my chronograph won't read that close, but that's pretty close. Now in our revolver, I did color one of these bullets completely black. I did that because I'm checking for bullet creep out. That's something you always want to do with semi-auto rounds that use a taper crimp while you're shooting through a revolver. So let's see how close I get to, you know, 1160-ish out of the 4-inch revolver. $11.71, $11.51, $11.51, $11.54. Wow, $11.11. That ain't right. And I don't really see any bullet creep out. Let me fire one more here. I think I have one chamber that just shoots kind of low velocity. I've noticed that. 1134. So our averages do show a little bit of gas loss, but it's interesting because I believe the highest single reading was out of this. But what we can say is that when you're talking cylinder gap, I've had a lot of people tell me this, and then when I tell other people that people have said that dozens of times, then they're like, nobody's ever said that. I assure you, people have said this. They have said you either lose most of your velocity out the cylinder gap or half of it. I've heard that a lot. When in reality, we're talking probably 3%, 4%, which is pretty in line with the cylinder gap size, is 0.003 gap. We'll probably have 3% loss. So yeah, you lose a little, but it's it's more significant one shot to the next with poor ammo of the difference in velocity than what it is through a cylinder cap gas loss. Let's hit our ballistics gel through both of these guns and see if there's any difference in how they perform in the different rifling spins. All right, our plain clear ballistics shot, no denim or fabric in a way that can potentially clog a hollow point, no rib simulation that could potentially slow down its penetration. And like I was saying about barrel spin rates, this lone wolf barrel that is in this 10mm conversion here has a one spin per every 16-inch barrel rate, as where our Smith & Wesson revolver here has a standard Smith & Wesson twist rate of 1 twist per every 18 3/4 inches of barrel. So that might make a difference, and the velocity, there's a tad difference there, but they were so close I'm not really sure that's going to make much difference. But let's see what we get from our semi-auto here. All right, now same round from our revolver. A lot less recoil in this for sure. Let's go take a look. And that is one of the reasons why I picked up that 610 revolver. Reduction in recoil. A lot of people don't understand that. They're like, why don't you just get like a Glock 20 if you're really going to start testing 10mm? And my research shown that this Smith & Wesson 610 gives almost exactly the same velocity as a Glock 20. And I think that's a 4.6 or 4.7 inch barrel, and with that revolver there's like 5.6 inches, and you take away the cylinder gap gas loss and you're right at, or a lot of times just a hair over a Glock 20. But I could do it comfortably and reliably all the time. As where, with my rheumatoid arthritis, why would I want to be shooting a Glock 20 all the time out here doing this testing when I have a better option for comfort? So that's why I got that 610 revolver. So I just thought I would clear that up before we talk about this here. First 3 inches, I call this the energy dump. It simply means, what's the likelihood it expanded right away? And right now we're seeing that it's likely it did expand right away, because we're seeing striation cutting that we see with expanded hollow points in that first 3 inches. As we enter the gel block here, almost looks like a little bit more damage with the revolver than the semi-auto, but these are very, very comparable. And you can't look at this and be like, well, that revolver, it shot it further because this and that, because the revolver, because these are so close in velocity. If I were to shoot 2 rounds from just one of these options, one of these guns, you would see a difference like this a lot of times. Sometimes that's just the way it works out, but they're usually so close that I only like to take 1 shot so I can keep the bullets in here and I'm not hitting other bullets. But we got a nice straight line penetration with both of these, which is a good hallmark of a nice 200 grain bullet. With our semi-auto, we went right to 16 3/4 inches of penetration. With our revolver, we went to about 18 3/4, so a couple inches more with the revolver, but that could just be 1 shot to the next. I'm not seeing a huge difference though when it comes to like what I think the rifling spin is doing, at least in our plain clear ballistic shot. So let's put on our rib simulation, put on our fabric, and see how these compare in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics. It represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard. It represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back. If these bullets pass through the back rib simulation and go beyond a couple inches, in my calculations that could indicate it would pass through an average sized person. But let's see what we get here from our semi-auto. Let me set that all back up and then we'll hit it from the Revolver. All right, our real world simulation from the Revolver. Let's go take a look. All right, not a big difference there. Energy dump in this first 3 inches, and honestly looks like there's more with the Revolver than the semi-auto. These hit kind of close to each other, but they went through their own hole through our rib simulation. Not a big difference there, honestly, with how big those holes are going through that. Let me put this back up so our measurements are more correct. And this whole thing did slide around quite a bit. It moved back a good 1/4 inch or so. And I'll take a look here at our back rib simulation. It's hard to really tell much from this. It looks like the one from our semi-auto may have went through straighter, but they both went to the same depths. But it does look like from our semi-auto there's a slightly more expansion, so probably there's slightly more tumbling effect from a Revolver, but they both went to about the same penetration. So, and both of them had about the same amount of striation, cut, and damage in there. They look pretty much identical. So it looks like we're close enough in velocity that our performance is pretty good. We kind of over penetrated, but I don't think this would pass to an average size attacker. What we're looking at here from our semi-auto is about 21.5 inches. So yeah, we're right on that edge there. I think that would stop in the t-shirt on the back of an average size person. 21.5. With our one from our Revolver, we're right at 22 inches, right about as far as you want to go. So if these were to pass through, I think they would just be rolling out 10 feet per second or something to hit the ground. So I would say, you know, this is pretty good because you're going to get your maximum permanent wound cavity. So yeah, I would say these performed about as good as you could perform, because, you know, when you're calculating like wounds, you have to calculate the entire thing. And like, you know, if a bullet stops halfway through this first one, we stop at like 10 inches and it looks about this good, but then it stops here. Well, there's almost double the amount of actual permanent wound cavity when we're talking about, you know, how far these things went, and they kept making cuts in there. So overall, these are pretty decent rounds. Not super powerful, but powerful enough, you know, right at about 357 Magnum power level. And, you know, what I like about rounds like this, and this is one thing, what I like about the 10mm. People are like, oh, you should have got a 357 Magnum. People say that to me all the time. It's like, well, I do got 357 Magnums. That's always been one of the things I always laugh at. It's like people are often like an and or thing. You can't have more than one gun. You should have got this. It's like, well, I got those. But what I do like about the 10mm versus the 357 Magnum is you have, you know, higher bullet weights. So you can do more of like dangerous animal protection. You know, it's a little more suitable for that than 357 Magnum, because you can shoot, you know, 200 grains at full power, as we're 357 Magnum. Once you go over 158 grain, you don't have a lot of case capacity, and you start losing energy, you know, pretty quickly. And, you know, if you want something for dangerous animals, 10mm is a little bit better. But then also you can go for a very low sectional density and have, you know, energy dump like crazy, like a 125 grain 357 Magnum. So I mean, I like 10mm overall as a cartridge. I just don't prefer it in semi-autos because, you know, even with people that are not me, I see a lot of malfunctions in supposedly fine firearms, and I don't like that. But as an actual cartridge, it's a great cartridge. So let's put these out of block, take a close look at them. Then we're going to shoot our steel with just a revolver and see how these things shoot for me. So let's do that. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain jowl. Here's the one from our semi-auto, and here's the one from our revolver. Not a huge difference. And what I'm seeing, if I had to take a guess, since I haven't measured these out here in the field, I would guess that the semi-auto one is a hair bigger than the one from a revolver. Because I think, you know, better odds of getting slightly more velocity, but I mean, they are both very, very similar in the amount of expansion we got with both of those. Now, looking at the ones going through our real world simulation, there definitely is a difference there. The one from our semi-auto has quite a bit bigger expansion than the one from our revolver. So this one did kind of, you know, it didn't expand as good, and then it kind of tumbled through that back rib simulation. So they're both pretty similar though, but just a little bit bigger with our semi-auto. So a little bit of a difference. I don't think it's enough difference to really make a realistic difference for whatever you were using these for, but just a slight difference. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I'm just going to pop these off from the revolver as fast as I think I can hit the target. So let's see how this thing will do for me from the revolver, how these loads will do. They feel real smooth for me. I'm really liking this over the 180 grains. I'm just seeing something with the 200 grains. I'm really liking it over the 180. It just feels more consistent from shot to shot. And even though the energy isn't higher, it just seems more consistent in our terminal ballistics. Let me back up from some distance just for fun and fire these off at the target from my 75-yard range. That'll be kind of our hunting simulation. So let's do that. Let's talk about the thermal ballistics of this. I'm going to say that 200 grain XTP is fantastic. I think it did really, really well. The 180 grain did well, but it's like 180 grain, you know, the expansion can change very drastically just by very little velocity change. That's where when you're working with a heavier bullet, you have a larger window there, buffer, to lose some velocity, and because it's a 200 grain bullet, you're still retaining good energy, and that energy will continue to provide good momentum and good expansion. That's one of those things that people say on my channel that I kind of laugh at. They're like, it's impossible for 45 auto to expand because, and all this whatever, but I've shot some rounds out of my new M&P shield with a 3.3 inch barrel, and we're talking 750 or 750 feet per second. I still got expansion with those. Why? Because, you know, 750 feet per second on a 230 grain bullet still provides enough energy for expansion. It's not 100% based on velocity. Velocity creates energy, and that will cause expansion. But if you have a heavier bullet and you're not quite as fast, you're still getting that energy, and it's still going to expand it out. And that's what I'm trying to say about this, is a little more consistent with the 200 grain in my opinion. So, again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar for sending these over to the channel. There's a lot of fun testing these, except for this part here, which is kind of frustrating, but that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.